Welcome back to Country Cow Designs. I'm Jo, and in this video I'm going to show you how to sew the Sevien Phone Bag. So this comes in a standard size and a wide size. It's a really straightforward sew, it's very beginner friendly, and it's very quick to make. So I will show you some of my prototypes that I've made. You can see on the back that the flap is a little bit longer because we're going to use it as a card slot. So on the inside, under the flap, you've got a slip pocket that you can fit quite a bit of stuff in. You can fit cards, but you could also fit a set of small keys, that sort of thing. Then of course you've got your phone compartment where you can fit your phone. And there's plenty of room in there, but some of the testers wanted a wider version, particularly if you're making it out of vinyl and stuff, you just might like to use the wider version. Then if you've got, you know, your loyalty cards for your coffee, that will slip into the back pocket behind. So you've got 3 little compartments in total. You've also got 2 options for the D-rings. This is the side option, this is the first option. And the second option is riveted into the back of the flap. So both of those options are covered in the sewing pattern. You can grab the sewing pattern from countrycowdesigns.com, or if you just want to see what's involved, you can just watch along with me. In this video, I'm going to make the narrower version of this with the same quilting cotton. You could use quilting cotton for this bag, or you could use cork or vinyl. The testers have made loads and loads of these bags, so we'll show a few of those now. And you can also see more of their photos on our website. So in this pattern, you can opt to use rivets or not. If you're using the second D-ring option, you do need to use rivets. So if it's your first time using rivets, I'll link a video now that goes into depth on how to set rivets. Because in the video, I wanted to make it quick and snappy. So we're just going to cover the very basics of fitting the rivets, that's it. I will just show you a couple more. This one is Adam's. This one actually we have a kit for at the moment on the website. We won't have them in stock forever, but at the moment, during the pattern release. So that's a nice little tartan one. This is one of the earlier prototypes, so the flap isn't as long as the finished bag, but you get the idea. This one is made from our Mora faux leather. And this was the very first one, so it's a little bit too short, but it does look cute in this fabric, and it does show how nice it looks with a rivet magnet. So if you have those, you could use one of those instead. So I think that's everything. Let's get started. Step 1 of the pattern is preparation. So just make sure that you've got all of your supplies prepared. So you should have some webbing for your strap, your swivel hooks, D-rings, and a strap slider. That's a spare one. If you want to use them, rivets, but these are optional, and a magnetic snap. But you could use lots of different types of turn locks or rivet magnetic snaps or different things like that if you want to. I've got a couple of bits of scrap stabilizer that I'll use later to back the prongs of my magnetic snaps and reinforce them. So you have to decide what size you want to make. I am making the standard size, which is the right size for a standard phone. But if you want a little bit wider, there's the wider option that's 1/2 inch wider. If you're using vinyl or cork for your exterior, I would recommend doing the wider option. Otherwise, you can choose and use something like quilting cotton like I'm using. So I'm using quilting cotton for the exterior and the lining. I've got lightweight interfacing on all of my pattern pieces. And I do recommend trimming a corner of interfacing out on your main panels and your pocket. It will just make it a lot easier to put the bag together. It will reduce the bulk in the top seams. Make sure you follow the cutting chart. It will tell you how to cut out all of your pattern pieces. Everything is a rectangle except for the flap stabilizer, which should already be fused to the lining piece of your flap. Also, you should have some stabilizers fused to the D-ring tabs. So you can choose whether you want to do side D-ring tabs, or if you want to do a long one that goes on the back and is riveted onto the back of the flap. So this second option is only possible if you're using rivets, whereas the first option is great whether you're using rivets or not. So that's just about everything. Let's move on to step 2. Step 2 is the flap. For this step, you're going to need your exterior and lining flap, one of your exterior main panels, this will be the back panel, and your magnetic snap. And I've got a little bit of Decaville light to cover my prongs later, but you could use any kind of offcut of stabilizer or anything you like, really. So the first thing you're going to do is grab your lining flap. Now this needs to be the top of the directional print, because when the bag is closed, This will be the lining, so it will be on the inside of the bag. And when you open up your flap, you want the print to be up the top here. Okay, so you're measuring and marking from the top of the directional print if you have one. So this is 1 inch up and centered. So we want to fit the male part of the magnetic snap to here. So I'm going to grab one of my washers, place it over the mark, and mark the 2 side slits. Then I'm going to get a small pair of scissors and snip those side slits. If you have some, you can use some fray check or something similar on the cotton. It's just good for making sure this lasts as long as possible. Then you're going to put the male part of the magnetic snap through your slits. Place the washer on top and fold your prongs down. Now this is where I like to just cover it with a little bit of stabilizer. Just whatever covers the prongs. So I'm just going to fuse that on there to cover the prongs and protect the exterior fabric from them. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is mark a 5-inch turning gap here. So you can see I've marked lines on my lining. This is so that we can turn the flap right side out. So I'm going to grab my exterior flap piece and I want to place them right sides together. Now if you have a directional print on the exterior, just remember it's going to be showing the wrong way on the back or the front. So I want mine to show the right way up on the front, which means this is my bottom edge and I want that to be where my magnetic snap is. Okay, so I'm going to place them right sides together like that and clip them together. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to start at one of my marks and sew around the whole flap. Follow the stabilizer and use a zip foot to get really close to the stabilizer. And when you get to these lines here, the start and end, you want to sew across the lines. So this section is going to be left for turning. Now if you have some pinking shears, you can trim around the curves and it will help the curves sit neater once we turn it out. If you don't have pinking shears, you can just create the same effect using a small pair of scissors and cutting small triangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it right side out. Now you may want, first of all, to just give this a little press, because this is going to be our turning gap and it will give you a neater finish if you've kind of got it pre-pressed where the gap's going to be. So you could just take it over to the iron and give that a good press. But then we're going to turn this out, right side out through that turning gap. And if you're using something like vinyl, you may just want to warm it up with a hairdryer. That will help it to turn easier. So spend a bit of time pushing and poking your curves out. Make sure they're nice and neat. It should just follow the shape of the stabilizer, so that's quite nice. And then we need to fold in this turning gap. So if you want to, you could use double-sided tape or something to hold it in. I find with cotton, I just like to press it with an iron. So I do the lining first as it easily folds around the stabilizer. That's the guide. And then I press the exterior so that it matches. So once you're happy with that, you could use some fabric glue to keep that closed, but I'm just going to use a couple of clips. Make sure that your lining isn't showing. That's the most important thing. Now we're going to top stitch this whole thing and we're going to use a generous 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, which is just slightly more than an 1/8. Okay, so that is now top stitched, and what you want to do is mark a line 4 inches up from the bottom edge. Okay, so the magnetic snap's up here. You want to measure 4 inches from the other end and draw a line across here using an erasable fabric pen. I'm going to do the same thing on the back panel, but I'm going to do it 3 inches up from the bottom. So now what I'm going to do is place the flap onto the back panel. So you might want a bit of double-sided tape for this step. I like to put some on the bottom, very bottom of the flap. Okay, so you've got your 3-inch line here. We're going to place the flap on that line. And it's going to be inset by 7/8 of an inch on each side. So just make sure that's nice and centered. Make sure your magnetic snap's up here and that you're on your 3-inch line. So you can add a couple of clips up here. Now what we're going to do is we are going to go from the 4-inch mark on the flap. We're going to backstitch really well. So all the way down and around and backstitch really well again on the 4-inch mark. We're going to do this with a scant 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's why we used a generous one for the top stitching. So this stitch is going to be just between the seam and your top stitch. So by doing it this way, it means we're going to have this little hidden slip pocket in the back. If you want to fit rivets, I do recommend rivets, but we're going to wait and we're going to do it at the very end so we can go through all the layers of the bag. So let's move on to the next step. Step 3 is the front pocket. For this step, if you are using the first D-ring method, you will have your D-ring tabs and your D-rings. I'm not going to use that method in this video, but you can see how to do that in the pattern. So that's where the D-rings come out the side of the bag, and if you aren't using rivets, you need to do it that way. I'm using the second method, so that will be later on. So for this step, you're going to need your exterior front pocket, your lining front pocket, and I've also got my remaining exterior main panel. So I've got my exterior main panel and my 2 front pocket pieces. The first thing we want to do is grab the exterior pocket piece and mark out your magnetic snap. So I'm going to fit this the same way that I did with the male magnetic snap. And I'm going to add a little bit of Decaville light behind this because there's no stabilizer on it like there was on the flap. And I'm also going to fuse a little scrap over the top of the prongs just to make sure that they don't rub through the fabric over time. So you're now going to place your 2 pocket pieces right sides together, line up those top edges, and then we'll sew the top edge together. Okay, so we are now going to press this seam open on top, and then you want your fabrics wrong sides together, right side out, however you like to describe that. Now if you want a bit of your pocket showing, you can do that. You can just roll it up so you've got kind of like a piping effect showing. Because mine's going to be on the same colour fabric, it's not really going to work, so I'm just going to press it as usual. But if you want that piping effect, it's a nice easy way to get it. So what I'm going to do is press that top edge, and then we're going to top stitch with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. So we're now going to trim this pocket a little bit. So what we want is for it to be the same width as the main panel at the bottom, but wider at the top. And the reason we do this is so that when your bag's finished, it doesn't crease the main panel behind, which you'll quite often see if your slip pocket is the same size. That is what will happen. So I'm just going to trim just down the edge here very slightly so that it's an 1/8 of an inch in on the bottom on each side. Okay, so I've trimmed my pocket so it was the same size at the top still, but on the bottom edge it's the same width now as my main panel. So what I'm just going to do before I go any further is baste the sides, and I'm going to do them both in the same direction so that if my fabric stretches, it's equal stretch and I don't end up with a wonky pocket. So now I'm going to place this onto my main panel, line it up with the bottom edge, and we're just going to sew that bottom edge in place, well, baste it with an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so now what we need to do is get this pocket to fit, so we're going to like pull it in slightly on the top edge, and then just make sure it's lining up all the way down the sides here. Same thing on this side, And you might just want to check that this distance is the same as this. Okay, so you can see your pocket's going to kind of stick upward. That is what we want. That's correct, don't worry about that. So again, I'm going to sew both sides, but I'm going to do it in the same direction. So if there's any stretch, it's going to stretch in the same direction. So if you're using that first method for the D-rings, you can make those now. If not, ready to move on to the next step. Step 4 is the main construction. For this step, you're going to need your 2 exterior panels, your 2 lining panels. And if you're doing the second option for the D-rings, you will need your D-ring strap and your 2 D-rings and 4 rivets. So if you haven't already, I do recommend trimming the interfacing out of these top corners on all 4 panels. It really makes a difference to how easy the top stitch is. So you want to mark both of your lining panels 1 inch down from this top edge. So you can see I've already marked my lines. What we're going to do is fold the top edge down to the line and give it a press. If you're using cotton, you can press with an iron. Otherwise you could use a seam roller for things like vinyl or cork. We're not sticking this down, don't use double-sided tape. We're just creating a crease that will make it easier later. Once that's done, you're going to do the same thing with the exterior panels, but this time your line is just 3/4 of an inch down. So take that over to the iron and give it a good press. Okay, so again, we're just creating a crease. So you actually want to unfold them, and you now want to place these right sides together. Now, if you were using the other D-ring method, the first D-ring method, your D-rings will be sticking out right now. So just bear that in mind. What you're going to do is you're going to place them right sides together and clip the 2 panels together. Okay, so your creases are unfolded, and we're going to sew all the way around using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now, a couple of the pattern testers wanted curved corners, so you could just draw a curve on there using whatever curved item you've got lying around. And then you could sew a curve on the bottom corners if you just want a different type of shape. But I'm going for a rectangle, so I'm going to sew down, across and back up. So we're now going to sew these lining panels together. And again, you want to make sure they're unfolded at the top. Make sure that the top edges are nicely matched up. Panels are right sides together. Now with the lining, I'm going to start with my 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, but when I reach this line, I'm going to increase it to a 1/2 inch and then do 1/2 inch all the way around and change back to a 3/8 of an inch for the top section, so that it will match the exterior on this top section, but the lining will be slightly smaller for the rest of the bag. So for both the lining and the exterior, you'll want to trim down your corners a bit. Don't get too close to your stitches though. Or what you may want to do is press it open with an iron, but this is difficult on such a small bag. But whatever you do, do not trim these top edges. These need to stay intact. So what you're going to do is turn your exterior right side out. Again, if you're using vinyl or something, you might want to use a hairdryer to warm it up, because it might be a bit stiff to turn out. Okay, so grab a turning tool or a chopstick or whatever you've got that's slightly pokey but not too pokey, and push out your seams and those bottom corners. Right, so what we want to do is press these side seams open and then fold it where you pressed it. Okay, so this crease is going to come in handy now. Just going to put a clip on that one. So you want to make sure that side seam is pressed open before you fold it back down. There we go. And you might want to just press the whole thing again to make sure your creases stay in place. That is up to you. But we're going to do the same thing with the lining. We're going to make sure this seam is open and then fold that down. Okay, see, you can see how that crease is making it easier now. Now you may want to press this seams open here. You can kind of do it like this, slightly less awkward, just makes the seams sit nice and neat inside the bag. Could do this with the iron or a seam roller. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to shove this inside the exterior. So depending how neat you want this to be, you could just spend a bit of time making sure your seams are sitting neatly on the inside. But what we are really focused on is matching up the sides here. So the side seam of the lining to the side seam of the exterior, and clip that together. Do that on both sides. Now make sure it's nicely lined up. You may want the lining to sit just the tiniest bit below the exterior so that you know it's not going to be poking up. Just don't push it down too far. So you don't want it poking up like it was there. Now you could use a little bit of fabric glue if you want. Just take a clip off at a time, add a bit of fabric glue so it all stays in place if you think that you'd be more comfortable that way. But what we're going to do is get the flap out of the way and we're going to sew this. Now this is awkward, so I strongly recommend doing it so that the machine is inside the edge here. It's a much simpler way if you ask me, or some people like to turn it so that it's the other way around, but I find that really difficult. I honestly think the easiest way is to sew it like this through the machine. Take your time, leave the needle in as you're adjusting. So we're going to do a top stitch with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance and 1/4 of an inch. So if you have the D-rings that are coming out the side, you can move on to the strap now. But for the second method, you're going to grab your D-ring strap. On the wrong side, you want to draw a line down the center here, and then we're going to fold these long edges into the center line and press. And these long edges should be wrapping neatly around the stabilizer. So now that's folded in, I'm going to take it over to the machine and top stitch both long edges. So on the wrong side of this, you want to measure and mark 2¼ inches in from each end, or if you're making the wide version, just 2 inches. Now grab a little bit of double-sided tape. This will make it easier. We just pop a bit on the end and then slip a D-ring on. Make sure your D-ring is on the right side of the finished strap. And then you fold the edge back to the line that you marked. Do the same thing on both ends. So that's how it should look on the right side, and then you've got the wrong side which has this raw edge showing here. Now if you want to, you can just sew a line across here just to hold the D-ring in place. I think it makes it more durable, but it doesn't look as pretty, so I'm going to leave that up to you. But if you do, just use a zip foot to sew that line. Okay, so we're ready to fit this. Now you want your bag so that the flap is lining side up, and you want this raw edge to go against that flap so it's going to be completely hidden. And you're going to kind of pull your bag out of the way and shove it down until it reaches like the stitching that stops it. That's where we're going to have it, so it's going to be kind of hidden like this, and on the back you'll be able to see the D-rings coming out. So once you're happy with your placement, use a little bit of double-sided tape to hold it in place. So as we do the first 2 rivets, we're going to do them 3/8 of an inch in from the edge of the flap. We are going through all the layers, like every single layer, so that you'll be able to see them here in the lining. But for the last 2 rivets, we don't want them to come through the lining, because then you wouldn't be able to use this little pocket back here. So for the last 2 rivets, they're just going to go through the flap and the actual strap. So I would recommend marking your first 2 rivets just using a ruler and a erasable fabric pen. So I'm going to go 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the flap. And then you're going through all the layers, so you can stick that inside and go ahead and punch that hole. And then I'm just going to pop a rivet through the hole. So some of the pattern testers prefer to fit the center rivets first, so you can do that if you want to. Either way around is fine. Just remember that your center rivets don't go through the main part of the bag, whereas your outside rivets do, like this. So for these last two rivets, I'm going to fit them 1 inch in, and what I'm going to do is kind of make sure that all my rivets are going to be in a nice straight line, basically. So you want them to be nice and lined up. And then remember that this time you are just going through these layers. So that's why the pattern testers say it's a bit easier to do it the other way. So you can do that. You can pop those out now if you want to, or you can go ahead and fit them like this. So you can see those center rivets, they just come through to here. So you might want to set them first, that might be a little bit easier. I haven't actually set my exterior ones yet. Do it whichever way you prefer, but so long as they're not coming through the main part here. Okay, so if you wanted to make it even easier for yourself to get the straight line, you could draw a line across here first, and then you can make sure all of your rivets are nicely lined up. So we're now ready to move on to the final step. So the final step is the strap, and you're going to need your webbing, your 2 hooks, your strap slider, and your finished bag. Now if you were doing the first option for the D-rings and they're coming out of the side of the bag, you could now fit rivets just at the top here where your stitching finishes, so where we finish sewing on the flap, and you could have it so it comes out through the lining of the bag. That will give it plenty of strength. But otherwise we're going to get the strap done. So if you are using nylon webbing like I am, you can melt the end so that it doesn't fray. Then what we're going to do is put it up and over this center bar and fold it underneath itself, so the raw edge is going to be completely hidden. And you want to fold it under by anything up to 1 inch really. Now if you're not using rivets, you can sew a box here as close as you can get, and an X through the box to add strength. And you can make that bigger if you find it easier to sew. I'm going to use rivets instead, so I'm just going to punch a hole through there. Okay, so the other end is going to go through a swivel hook and then back over this center bar like this. So as you pull it tight, that's what it should look like on that end. And then on the remaining end, I'm going to fit the second swivel hook. And again, I'm going to fold it over so that the raw edge is completely hidden. Fold it over by anything up to 1 inch. You can always fold it over further if you like and add more than 1 rivet. That is absolutely fine. Or of course, if you're sewing, you would just sew a box and an X here. Okay, and that is your strap finished. You can just go ahead and clip that on. And I definitely need to take this over to the iron and give it a really good press. So there's our finished bag. I think it looks so cute in this fabric, and the change of fabric on the front here just kind of means that you get a little peek of it here. So I think that looks really good. So this is a great option. If you're new to bag making a bag out of quilting cotton is just so much easier. It results in like a really nice finished bag. So if you're trying this for the first time, quilting cotton is such a great option. And there you can see the difference between the standard and the wide. So for our next pattern, I will show you quickly. We have got a laptop iPad sort of bag coming up. There's going to be 3 options in the pattern, but for size, but you can also adjust it by printing it at a different scale if you want to. So this is the full size for I think it's a 14-inch laptop, so it's quite a big bag to be honest. And if you look carefully, you'll notice it's a pouch masquerading as a bag. So this fits, yeah, a really big 14-inch laptop. And The thing I like about this is that I didn't just want it to be a sleeve, I wanted to be able to fit other stuff in there. So you can also fit your charger and your tape measure if you have one. I always have one with me. You can fit a mouse, you can fit loads of stuff because look at the size of that base. The base is bigger. This one has a cork overlay, the finished pattern won't, but you can see how much space there is in there to fit your extra stuff. So I've been making changes as I go through the prototypes because I want it to be quick and easy. Again, I want to do a couple of easy patterns at the moment because I know there's things that we can add like base overlays, but they add so much complication to the pattern, and actually I want to make these nice and fun to sew because we want some fun sewing projects at the moment. So this is a slightly smaller size, and then we also have an iPad size. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. It will be coming up on the YouTube maybe July sort of time. So keep an eye out for that and make sure that you subscribe if you want to be notified when it comes out. See you soon. Bye.